I only buy the finest TV, sister. See, BOPF.
BOPF is indicated on the pack.
Sister, the art of tea.
On to news overseas. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces bombarded rebel-held suburbs of the capital Damascus today.
Now, this is the very same area where opposition forces accused the army of gassing hundreds of people in a chemical weapons attack only yesterday.
That's right, Shanali. News First Alexander Holmes, of course, who has been following this story very closely, filed this report.
The besieged rebel-held Damascus suburb known as Ghouta suffered further attacks this morning as government forces intensify pressure on rebel strongholds. The area is inhabited mostly by members of Syria's Sunni Muslim majority, who have been at the forefront of the uprising against Assad's Alawite rule. Yesterday's death toll has been estimated between 500 and 1,300, which would make it the world's most lethal chemical weapons attack since the 1980s, and has prompted an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council in New York. The Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations issued the following statement.
As you have seen from the statement of the Secretary General earlier today, he was deeply disturbed, in fact shocked, by these allegations, and of course we see the need to investigate this as soon as possible. Dr. Sellström and his team are in place in Damascus. We hope that they will be given access to the area by the government.
Meanwhile, on Syrian state TV, the Syrian Information Minister, Omran Zoabi, flatly denied any government involvement in the attack. Everything that has been said is absurd, primitive, illogical and fabricated. What we say is what we mean. There is no use of chemical weapons at all. At least not by the Syrian army or the Syrian state. And it's easy to prove. Syria is not party to a number of international treaties that ban the use of chemical weapons. Western nations believe the Assad regime has built up a substantial and varied arsenal of such weaponry. Alexander Holmes, News First International Desk.
We're now joined in the studio by Alex. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. Alex, I'd just like to ask you a couple of quick questions about the chemical weapons attack in Syria. What do we really know about the Assad regime's chemical weapons capabilities?
Well, the international community were in no doubt, even before they admitted to having chemical weapons, that they were in possession of them. But there is no real reliable evidence of how they've obtained them or how they've developed them. They haven't signed the Chemical Weapons Convention nor ratified a Biological and Toxic Weapons Convention. So there's no formal declaration of stockpiles. But we do know that they have large quantities of mustard gas and sarin. It's highly suspected. And the CIA believe that they are even attempting to make an even more toxic substance, such as VX gas. Now, Turkish, Arab and Western intelligence believe the stockpile to be around 1,000 tons in around 50 cities within Syria. But it is the sophistication with which they can deliver these gases that it's got the communities worried around the world. They can use aerial bombs, artillery shells, or even rockets and ballistic missiles.
So just another question before I let you go. This is not the first chemical weapons attack that we have seen in Syria. There have been several in the recent past. Could you give us a recap of a few of those?
Yes. There's 5 areas that have an attack alleged. The UN will be inspecting 3 as we speak. 2 we don't know, but 1 we do. And that was the first attack on the 19th of March 2013 in an area of Aleppo which the government claimed the rebels launched. They said that terrorists fired rockets containing chemical material. And they published photos of certain victims with no sign of exposure to any sort of substances. But on the same day, villages near Damascus, there were activist videos of victims with difficulty breathing, a semi-conscious man with fluid being removed from him, and there were 6 alleged dead there. Now, the third attack happened 5 days later in the same village near Damascus. Rebel TV channels showed footage of people with symptoms and doctors' interviews. And then the fourth one happened in a neighborhood near Aleppo. The journalist Anthony Lloyd of The Times actually confirmed 3 dead there, and footage later surfaced of people frothing at the mouth and twitching, and the 5th one, just before Wednesday, the final one, was in a town called Sarok, and that also had activist footage that was seen by the BBC, but of course you can't really verify any of these footages. Now, obviously, Wednesday was by far the worst in case of numbers. UK Foreign Secretary William Hague said that if it is confirmed, it would be a shocking escalation in the use of chemical weapons in Syria. But the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, went even further. He said there must be a reaction of force, obviously not by troops on the ground, but still a reaction. And when he was pressed by the interviewer, he didn't rule out aerial military involvement.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander Holmes. Alexander Holmes, of course, has been following the developments in Syria very closely. Moving on to some other international news, former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has been released from prison after appealing against his detention. Now, he was flown out by helicopter from Tora prison in Cairo, but is now expected to be put under house arrest. News First, Saskia Valenda filed this report.
Convening at Cairo jail where Mubarak is held, the court ordered the release of the military man who ruled Egypt for 30 years until he was overthrown during the uprisings that swept the Arab world in early 2011. 85-year-old Mubarak was convicted last year of involvement in the murder of protesters during the uprising and sentenced to life in prison. However, he was granted a retrial earlier this year. The court ordered Mubarak's release because he has served the maximum pre-trial detention of 2 years. His next hearing is scheduled for August 25th. The court ruling removed the last legal ground of his imprisonment in connection with the corruption case. Mubarak will not be allowed to leave Egypt and his assets remain frozen. According to state-run media, Egypt's interim military government extended its crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood by arresting the group's spokesman, Ahmed Arif. Earlier this week, the military arrested Mohamed Badi, the group's spiritual leader, Safwat Hegazi, a preacher and activist, and Murad Ali, a media advisor to the Muslim Brotherhood's political party.
It is clear that the Muslim Brotherhood are the third party. They are the ones who kill. Yes, there was corruption during Hosni Mubarak's time, but it wasn't the extent as to what we see today. There is no such thing as for and against. This is merely a decision, not a ruling.
Also in international news, Shanali, in a CNN interview, Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg spoke about the importance of Internet.org, his new global collaborative initiative, and how it is addressing one of the biggest problems of his generation.
Yes, Nadim. Now, the entrepreneurial mogul announced the launch of a partnership aimed at extending Internet access to 5 billion people in the next 10 years.
Getting access to the internet is a really big deal. I think we're going to be able to do it. You know, we have a plan, a rough plan for what we think we're going to need to do to pull it off. And of course the plan will evolve over time and we'll get better ideas, but you know, if you look at the trends, I mean, data is becoming more available to people, right? Apps are getting more efficient to run. There are new business models to help more people get online. And we just believe that everyone deserves to be connected and on the internet. So we are putting a lot of energy towards this.